Hey everybody, welcome to this radio channel. And today I'm going to talk about a phenomenon that's sporadic E-skip. Now, this is one of those very particular phenomenon that is happening from time to time and that can really change propagation in a high frequency range amazingly. It's, one of those phenomenons that is not totally understood. We think, there's different theories here. Some science behind it think that maybe some micrometeorites could enhance such propagation. Personally, I think the weather has a lot to do with it. As when we get into the summer days and there's lots of thunderstorms, it seems to coincide with also the fact that there's a lot of sporadic E-skip happening. Now, sporadic E-skip, first, if you take it for sporadic, because it doesn't happen all the time, it's here and there, patches here and there that appear sporadically anytime. Typically, it can happen any time of the year, but there's a season, there's a period where it's more frequent and often more intense, and it's the summer months of June and July. And August will also see some of the sporadic E-skip, but usually June, July are the biggest months for that. They appear out of nowhere. Basically, you're listening and an hour later there's nothing happening, and an hour later you just tune back and voila, you have sporadic E-skip. And signals become really intense. It affects mostly the high frequency ranges. So sporadic E is really, really amazing on the higher frequencies. What happens with sporadic E is that the patches of ionized basically air in the ionosphere are so intense that they will actually propagate very, very high frequencies. An example is usually 10 meters, or the CB band, 11 meters, often gets enhanced propagation and you start hearing signals from far away. But it can go much higher. When sporadic E-skip happens, usually even the VHF range can be affected. So often I will go into the 6 meter band, 50 megahertz, and check out if I can listen to some amateur radio operators from far away. An example is a few years back I've heard a amateur operator in Morse code that was in Mexico. So it gives you an idea of how far you can receive on very high frequencies. So it's something that you have to check for regularly. People tend to do the same old thing on the radio, and that's why they get bored of listening to the radio at some point. When I see, oh, there's nothing to listen to. Yeah, but what did you try to listen to? Just the regular, international broadcast bands, and you just gave up? Well, there's more to radio than that. And sporadic E-skip is part of that unusual phenomenon that can happen. And even if shortwave's dead, even if shortwave doesn't propagate well, if there's sporadic E-skip, one thing that you can see is that higher frequencies can suddenly be really open and you got 10 meters full of signals from everywhere. They are a little more regional. So for example, sporadic E-skip will not give you stations from Australia on 10 meters, because the sporadic E-skip is very regional. So the patches appear at certain parts of the ionosphere. So for example, you'll see a pattern usually. An example that I have is one evening I start listening and I start hearing tons of signals on 10 meters and even on 50 megahertz, 6 meters. But when you listen, you notice that they all come from Alabama, Texas. So now you know that the patch of ionized layer from sporadic E-skip gives me that part of basically North America to listen to. And you will not hear in general, stations from somewhere else. You can have another one and then suddenly you hear stations, say from state of Washington, California. But you don't hear anything from the south of the United States. So it gives you an idea that, you know, the patches give you specific areas when they happen. Distance, sometimes when there's a lot of it, you know, I've seen reports of sporadic E skip over the ocean giving propagation from Europe to North America, for example. I've seen reports of, you know, quite long distance sporadic E skip listening. But in general, it will stay most of the time within a continent. So very often, if you have it, for example, in Europe, you'll hear European stations, but not much more than that in general. So it's, well, be mostly Europe. If it happens in North America, it will sometimes be most of North America can listen, but very often part of North America. So for example, the East Coast will suddenly be open to Florida or, you know, eastern states, eastern seaboard states, but nothing else. And the West Coast doesn't hear anything. Or the reverse is true. West Coast has sporadic E skip and the East Coast doesn't have anything. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And the way to know if it actually is happening is my favorite, listening to channel 6 on the CB band, because that's where all the very high powered, technically illegal CBers will hang out. So what I'll do is punch 27.025 on my receiver and I'll leave it there. Presently we hear nothing except static, but if you leave it on that frequency, if you suddenly start hearing tons and tons of CBers, then you know sporadic E skip is probably happening. Now it's time to listen to the 10 meter band. So you can go into the 10 meter band and, you know, try to listen to stations on the 10 meter band. If you've got higher VHF capabilities, start tuning around starting at 30 megahertz and tune around and go up to 50 megahertz. Try to listen to the amateur bands, the 6 meter amateur band. Sporadic E skip is not always ionized strong enough to support up to 50 megahertz, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it is even so ionized that it can even propagate stations from the FM band. So when you listen to the FM band, you will tune around where there's no stations, basically, and see if you can hear long distance stations. Some people will DX the FM band when there's sporadic E skip because you might hear FM stations from 1,000 miles away. So it's a very interesting phenomenon and it's something to check for. So for example, today I am working from home. What I've decided to do is leave my receiver on channel 6, 27025, with a very low volume, and if I hear anything, about an hour ago, for about 10 minutes, I heard very strong signals. They were peaking really in, you know, S9 plus 10 plus 20. I heard a few 10 meters stations, but it typically lasted only about half an hour and it was gone. So there are some patches that are very brief, but you have patches that can actually last for hours. And what's nice about sporadic E skip is that it's not dependent on any period of the day. So you know that higher frequencies usually propagate in the daytime and not in the nighttime. But with sporadic E, there's no time limit. So you can listen at, you know, midnight or 1 a.m. and find that it's full of signals because sporadic E skip is happening. And the reason why it works even in the middle of the night, it's because it's not dependent on solar radiation. It's dependent on phenomena that happens here on Earth, like thunderstorms and maybe all sorts of little details. You know, like I said at the beginning, we're not totally sure what makes sporadic E skip patches happen. But you know, weather, when there's weather fronts with lots of thunderstorms, some say maybe some micrometeorites sometimes, some, you know, other phenomena like you know, the winds and everything can maybe ionize patches sometimes. So it's a very peculiar mode of propagation, but it's very, very interesting. In the next video that I'll be posting today also, I'll show you a great tool on the web that you can use to see where sporadic E skip is happening around the world. It's a very, very useful tip. Hope you enjoyed this series of videos on sporadic E. It is a very, very interesting phenomena to listen to, and once you hear it once, you'll get hooked, and you'll say, wow, I want to try for another one. And remember, June and July, the best months, but it can happen any time of the year. Any time of the year. So, you know, have a listen from time to time. You never know what you can hear on the radio bands. Hope you enjoyed this video, and hope you enjoy my channel.